Hi, I'm Dr. Kevin Milo, one of the co-hosts of the Physician Empowerment Podcast. At Physician Empowerment, we're dedicated to improving the lives of Canadian physicians, personally, professionally, and financially. If you're loving what you're listening to, let us know. We always want to hear your feedback. Connect with us. If you want to go further, we've got outstanding programming both in person and online. So look us up. But regardless, we hope you really enjoy this episode.
So welcome everyone to this very special edition of the Physician Empowerment webinar/podcast. And today we are very honored to have two faculty members, one Simon and one Jason. And they are regular faculty members, and Simon is a wealth planner extraordinaire, and Jason is tax lawyer extraordinaire. So today we want to talk about something we'll cover in our upcoming Mexico trip, and that's called Behind the Curtain. What does the ultra wealthy do? So let me get some context, right? This just a word about the conference. It would be Health and Wealth Summit. The health side, we'll talk about something else, and Kevin would cover in a different session. But the wealth side would start to say, hey, really, what does the top 1% do, right? And how people get to there to be wealthy, everybody's different. Everybody has their path. But once they reach there, how do they stay there and to create something that would stay well in their retirement years, right? They've attained the financial freedom. How do they stay free? And how do they keep it on to the next generation or generations, right? And so they're common threads. So I'm going to poll the brains of both Simon and Jason. And so there are a few threads that we can pull through people who are the top 1%er or ultra wealthy. And they're up there, like either they have family office, they're not just I'm it, right? So let's open the mic for both of our speakers and say, hey, what do you guys see your high net worth clients or institutional level clients? Are there any common threats of how they preserve their wealth?
Yeah, for sure. Did you want me to bring in on this first, Jason? Yeah, jump right in.
Yeah, go ahead.
Awesome. Yeah, no, I think me and Jason we deal with a lot of high net worth, especially business owners out there and other physicians. And one of the most common threads we find is that, especially when it comes to money, people think they focus on trying to get the highest rate of return. But what I typically find in terms of clients that do accumulate a lot of wealth, it is they have they place a lot of emphasis, and actually more emphasis, on risk mitigation, trying to reduce any kind of potential losses. So I don't think, one of the biggest rules obviously is, when it comes to money management, is obviously don't lose the money you've made. And I think sometimes we forget about that a little bit. We get caught up in hearing about that neighbor that made 100 times return on their crypto, or someone that made a ton of money on NFT, or someone that bought into a stock or a stock option or a future contract and quadrupled their money in a few weeks. And we tend to focus on that, on the upside, but we really do not focus enough, I think, especially when it comes to people that have money, is just managing the risk involved in it.
Right. Now, let me just backtrack half a step, right? This is a really good start already, right? People can just strike it rich just by luck, right? Or people have great talents, and I've heard and read and seen and witnessed some people got rich really quickly, but because they didn't know how to get there. So they never learn how to keep it, so they don't keep it. You can talk about sports stars, right? Make 8-digit income, and then 10 years later, they're broke, right? People who won the lotto, right? And so you may say that, hey, I'm not the top 1%er. No, you're not. You may not. And you may be there, you may not be there. But then we need to start with the end in mind. And if we don't have the know-how and understanding and the habits of doing it, by the time you get there, or you may not even know you get there, right? And then things just poof, they leave you, right? So I think that's really, really important. Good point there. And I I'm also taking a course, and this big master, he's got 30,000 students globally. He said that in the stock market, this guy hit it rich. And he said, if you just go into a bull market, you won 100 million. Okay, well 100,000, you're going to say, oh, I'm going to keep going, right? Keep gambling, right? And if you won a million, 10, right? And you're getting 30, 40, 50 or so, are you still going to gamble at all, right? You have to be able to find a way to keep things, right? So that's about risk tolerance. Jason.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so to jump in there, so obviously I'm a tax lawyer. I'm not a money manager or kind of wealth person. So everything I hear is more kind of everything I'll say here today is much more observation based than backed up by research and papers, because that's not my experience. But yeah, what I find is there needs to be a mindset shift from wealth accumulation, where you need to be perhaps a little more bullish and aggressive, to wealth preservation, which was kind of Simon's first point of you need to make sure you don't lose what you've built. And yeah, there's definitely an element of how many times can you if you're getting into things that can give you a 10 times return, that probably has a sizable risk of going to zero as well, right? So how many times can you get a big multiple on one of your investments before you eventually go bust? And so the problem is when you go to the casino, that's how the casinos make their money, right? Like they know that once they're in your head, people will keep going in because they never have that point of knowing when it's time to leave the casino, when you kind of come out ahead and you're not going to come out any better. And so it's important with your personal finances to not get in that mindset, because if you just keep chasing those big returns and multiples over and over and over again, you can double your money 5 times over. But if you eventually go to zero, it doesn't matter if you started with a really big number or a small number, you still are back at zero. And so again, not bringing that gambling mindset to your portfolio, to your wealth is important, and that preservation is important. And so there's definitely, and we'll get into it, I'm sure, later tonight, of everyone is on a different journey, everyone has different objectives. And I think the key point I think I'll probably hammer on for this whole podcast is being intentional and understanding yourself, your goals. That's really I think that's what the really wealthy people do. They understand who they are, they understand how they make money, and they understand, what their long-term objectives are with their money. And they think about it, and they're intentional. That's the word I'll keep using all night, is intentional.
Very, very important. And so we're actually talking about emotional economics, right? So they're saying that everybody wants to go to heaven, nobody wants to die, right? Everybody wants to do these 2-3 digit returns. Nobody wants the downside in the portfolio, right? So when they do the KYC, how much do you want to get returns, and how much risk can you stomach, right? Well, it's usually really, really different. So Simon, this is in your wheelhouse. So you do this all day. So how do you see the regular average middle class people versus the more level-headed, institutional-minded investors?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. When it comes to the level-headed institutional investors, typically they have a strategy, and what ends up happening is when you're not disciplined when it comes to investing, you will make bad decisions. And I've seen it time and time again. I've seen clients that will have all their money in maybe some sort of micro cap ETF that they're thinking, it's done really well. They might have a couple, 2 good, 3, maybe 3 good years where, they're getting double digit returns. And then they hit a roadblock where they typically have a really bad downswing. And let's say it's even a 40, 50% downswing. And what always almost ends up happening is that person will not stick it through. They will usually either sell at the worst time, sell part of their portfolio, or sell all of their portfolio because they're scared it's going to go down further. And, the problem with the average person is there's a lot of psychological biases that are going to prevent you from making the right decision at the right time. And I don't think a lot of people realize this, everything from loss aversion to confirmation bias to even anchoring bias. There's a lot of different biases that kind of control how we react to certain situations when they happen. And even me as an advisor, where I've been trained in this, it's actually very, very difficult to overcome. And at the end of the day, and unfortunately, because you are so personally and emotionally attached to your own money, when markets are not doing well, even when they're doing good, you cannot make rational decisions sometimes. And even when you think you're making those rational decisions, you cannot. And that's why with institutional money managers, a lot of times they can do that. They can stick it through. They have a strategy, they have a process that they typically follow. And regardless of what happens, they follow that process. And that's why, when you take a look at, I think there was a study once done by Fidelity. Their Fidelity Balanced Mutual Fund over over a 15-year period, I think had an average return of about 8.7%. So that's if you stayed in the fund, but they took a look at their average investor that was invested in that over the same time period. And what ended up happening was the average investor actually only made anywhere from about 3 to 4%. What happened? They made all the worst decisions. They basically, when the market started going up, they started dumping more and more money into it because, again, they felt like, once when money's doing really well and you're making really good returns, you tend to dump more money into it. And when things were going badly, they would pull out money and wait for the right time, and that right time would never come back. Right? They would just put it back in when it was. So that was a really powerful study because it was done over 1,000 clients, and it just showed even though the fund itself did really well, the average client that was invested in it did not do as well as the actual fund itself. So
no, and it going back to you said kind of having the institutional investors, like having a plan, sticking to it, being part of a team that can hold you accountable. It reminds me, to be super nerdy here, it's a quote of I think it's Picard from Star Trek. I think it was, you can make all the right decisions, you can make all the correct decisions and still lose, right? And sometimes that's life. But the importance of having that plan, hey, you still might come out on the wrong end, but being able to remove emotions from it is important. It's tremendously difficult. And again, my background is in economics, took behavioral economics classes before law school. So I shouldn't say my background is in economics. I have an economics undergrad. But yeah, behavioral economics, like the human mind is not really wired for investing. There's just too many, and you touched on most of them, like biases that, and loss aversion is a big one, right? There's lots of studies that say losing $100 hurts more than it feels good to win $100, right? And so what happens is when you lose that $100, it leads to some really bad kind of waterfall of decisions as you try to make that up, or you just pull everything out because now you don't even want to be in the markets, and then you miss out on the upswing that comes after losing that $100. And so what we see the wealthy do is it's important to try to remove yourself from a lot of those decision-making points. And that involves kind of building a team around you. That's a big thing we talk about here on the team and with the faculty is everyone who's listening to this is an expert in their own fields. And you're probably not also an expert in accounting and in legal and in finance and in investing. And to be blunt, there's very few people throughout human history who can be an expert in so many diverse fields. And so it's important to, once you cross a certain wealth threshold, to build a team so you can go and do what you're good at. And then you have other people who are good at what they're good at. And there's, it makes economic sense to kind of divvy up the responsibilities like that.
So that's interesting because we have, I keep telling that people that we've been in this game long enough and look at the audience where people come from, right? And there are two big camps, right? There is a camp that everything is DIY, right? Everything's DIY. That's how they became successful in their own profession. They trust no one, right? It's like you talk about being a Star Trek Trekkie. What about Scully and X-File? Trust no one, right? I have specialist colleagues that would literally reorder every test that somebody else, another colleague ordered, right? Like just trust no one, right? Everything is DIY. They're the John Waynes, they're the Lone Rangers of the world. And so they have some professional success and they come to wealth building and they also DIY everything, right? And they listen to some other podcasts, not ours, and say, hey, like these managers are worth nothing. You can do it yourself by ETF and you can retire in the glory. And then, so those people, that's one camp. The other camp is they are agnostics and they don't have a clue, right? They just give it up to everyone else. Delegation actually is not, is abdication. They don't even have a clue and they don't understand. I kept saying that I have a colleague that for the last 20 years, this big wealth manager company told him that, hey, we made you 20% every year on stock market for the last 20 years. And he believed that, right? And, you hired Warren Buffett, right? So there are people who they just don't want to know anything about it. And then there's somebody, the other candidate just grab everything in their hands. So I'm sure, Simon, you've seen all these people, right? So how do they differ than the family offices, people who go up there?
Yeah, I think this is going to be another huge differentiator I find between businesses that are very, very successful and versus businesses that are only doing well. Businesses that are really, really successful, the owner does not waste time trying to do everything themselves. They realize their value and how much they bring to the business. So they're not trying to be experts at everything within that. And that, I think, is a really important lesson to learn. I remember when I worked at the accounting firm, they had it down to a science. And the managing partner that I reported to would always say, Simon, I don't even want you crossing the road unless it's going to make us $600 to $700 an hour. And he didn't want me, I would get in trouble if I filled out my own paperwork, if I did all these little things, because he's like, you should be out there maximizing your time, making the most amount of money for the firm, because you can make that and have everyone else take care of all the little things. But unfortunately, that's kind of how I think good business owners think. But unfortunately, some people try to, like you said, DIY everything. And they'll try to learn how to figure out their own tax work. They'll try to figure out how to basically manage their own investments, like you said, with the ETFs. They'll spend hundreds of hours reading on all these different things. But again, they can go out there and be physicians and make $1,000 an hour, or make a ton of money doing that and just hire someone else to do that. Like, I remember even the managing partner, he refused for us to actually drive to have our dry cleaning put away, because he'd rather have someone come to the office and pick it up for us, so we wouldn't waste time, because he accounted for every 15 minutes. I think, when you're working in that environment, it's a stressful environment, and you probably don't have to go to that same degree as a physician. But I think you should keep it in mind that you don't have to be an expert in everything. And realistically, you should realize your time is best spent doing what makes you the most money, and not doing things that don't really help you as much per se. Because again, even when it comes to looking and doing real estate, sometimes it makes sense to have a professional like Wing and Kevin kind of help you out with that, versus you kind of trying to do that on your own, because it's a lot of hours that you're going to waste trying to do that on your own, to be honest. And is it worth your time? I would say a lot of times no. So,
well, and the flip side of that too, and that's a really good point. Hey, your time as a physician is worth, upwards of $1,000 an hour or more. So yeah, you should be spending time doing that. On the flip side, you're also probably working 70, 80, 90, 100-hour weeks at times, right? So your leisure time is also tremendously valuable. Like, if you only get, if you're getting home at 9 and you have 2 hours to, maybe put the kids to bed, spend some time with the spouse before you crash and have to wake up at 4 a.m. the next day, like, that time is very valuable, that 2 hours to you. And I don't think a lot of people looking back, like, the value is actually there, that opportunity cost of, again, sinking that into going home and logging onto your TD Ameritrade account and trying to figure out, how the stock market moved that day and what the best moves are the next day. And so again, it's that time, it's both sides of it. One, if you're going to be spending time trying to build value, the best way for you to probably do that is, the profession you spent a tremendous amount of time training for and have an expertise that very few people have. By the same token, if you're not doing that thing, you should probably be doing something you enjoy, because you don't get to do much of that from residency through to retirement. Yeah. So, and Wing, you can probably even attest to that, how valuable that time is and how little of it there sometimes is, and how important it is to treasure it.
Exactly. So people play it. Wealth building is not a solitary game. It's a team sports, right? And so how would you guys see this this wealth team, your wealth building team, your A team, who should be in there, and who, yeah, like for your family wealth, who should be in there? Who should be doing what? So what would be the most basic structure you guys would say?
Yeah, no, that's a really good question, Wing. And I think there's going to be nuances to this, and I think we've talked about this, Jason. Usually you need some sort of lawyer, you need some sort of accountant, and you need some sort of financial money person. And even within those three categories, you're gonna want some specialists, right? Like you don't want your accountant that does your year ends being able to also do, help you do your valuations for your business. That also helps you do complex tax issues, and same with your money person. The person that's helping you do some of your planning work probably most likely is not going to also be extremely skilled at insurance and extremely skilled at picking the exact stocks. So I would say those are the three, but there's obviously categories within those three categories as well.
Mm-hmm. So then maybe we'll gravitate over to the structure, right? Because I think that is really important, because when you talk about the team, right, you're building a structure, right? And I can attest to that myself. And of course, you two have had tons of experience, right? As I was going down this road of being self-employed, right? And I told everybody the first year we didn't even know we have to save money to pay tax, right? So we keep building companies, heard about this and that. And by the end of the day, a few years later, you build something. You build a Frankenstein. Then you have to pay people to retrofit them, so that the head is not up the rear end, right? So everything makes sense structurally, tax-wise, and all that. So yeah, so maybe enlighten us, Jason. And same with you, Simon, right? You've seen tons of people just on the fly, right? Create stuff. So can you tell us some good and bad examples structurally?
For sure. I think the message that I'm imagining we both will drum here is that intentionality, and there's no perfect structure, because everyone likes to invest in different things. Some people like marketables, some people like real estate, some people like cash under the mattress, right? That's safe and secure, and they know that there's enough there, and they just don't want to lose it, right? So, and there's no right structure, because it always bleeds into, again, what do you want to do? What stage of your career are you at? And so I think it's important to, again, be intentional and just make sure you check in on yourself, on your goals, and where you're at in respect of those goals. Because you're right. No, I've seen tons of examples where clients come to us and they've got 4 corporations that are off to the side that, oh, I made that one because I was going to get into business with my buddy, and then we ended up not. But then I needed another one that I was going to have, my spouse is a shareholder. So we made that one. I didn't touch the old one. And again, they just end up with kind of a lot of extra cost and complexity that doesn't really serve them. So yeah, again, that intentionality of just making sure you're checking in. But I think one of the keys, again, circling back to our topic of what do the ultra wealthy do, is, again, they're intentional about it, but a lot of it is about kind of protection, conservation, creditor protection, making sure that the wealth is safe and can serve the family kind of in the present and into the future. And there's lots of ways to get to that end goal. But I'll flip it over to Simon to talk about, again, aligning your kind of intentions with where you're at in your life.
Yeah, no, exactly. I think you covered a lot of good points there. And I think like you said, you should really have a goal and an intention in mind. And that also helps future-proof sometimes your structure and what you're doing. I'll kind of give an example of something recent that just came up that cost the client quite a bit of money because he wasn't intentional with what he was doing. He had actually, had a fairly simple corporate structure where he had a operating company, he had a holding company. And one of the big goals that he really wanted to make sure was that he left a good amount for his children and his grandchildren. He actually had 19 grandchildren and 6 children. So a lot to left over. A lot of the net worth was actually in the corporation. And what ended up unfortunately happening was he accumulated a lot of money inside a life insurance policy inside the operating company. And what ended up happening was that the fair market value in that life insurance company was worth quite a bit of money over the original adjusted cost base. And it ended up that he did end up selling the company, and he wanted to move that life insurance policy to another entity of his. Unfortunately, when you start moving things around instead of planning ahead, he should have probably did this 30 years ago. He moved that, and it caused a fairly large deemed disposition of almost, I think it was $2.5 million of taxes that he had to incur on something that large, because he unfortunately could not just sell the operating company and keep that life insurance policy in there, because obviously the new owners would get that. But that was because there was not a lot of intention when he started planning this 30 years ago. He just kind of did things, he bought things, and there wasn't a lot of advice there. And he didn't really think about it until now, when he was ready to sell the business and he was putting together a estate plan. And unfortunately, there's lots of situations like this where you don't really plan far ahead. You don't plan where you're going to own things, how things are going to be owned, and you don't plan for future taxes. And me and Jason run into situations like this all the time, where we got to restructure. There could be a deemed disposition. There could be other liability issues. And these are all things that could be avoided if it was done properly years ago. And even if we've tried to fix this 15 years ago, it probably would have been better. But yeah, these are, I think, all things that to keep in mind. And there's a lot of stories out there like that. So,
So I can pull tons of personal and related examples, right? A lot have to do with taxation, right? People do something silly, right? They know better, and they end up having a ton of tax consequence, right? Not just the money that they owe, but the penalty. But then they have to have what they call double taxation, right? They get just spanked left, right, and center, right? And so that's just not fun. Okay, so let's move on to another thread. So there's a book called Millionaire Next Door, right? And they talk about these average millionaires out in America. They do not just drive a flashy car, live in a flashy house, right? Flashy jewelry, and custom-made suit and all that. They're rather modest, right? And so the richest man, one of the richest men in Hong Kong, his name's Li Ka-shing. This guy is multi-billionaire. Of course, he's left Hong Kong. But when he first bought Husky Oil of Alberta, of Canada, the stock market of Hong Kong at that time crashed. Like it was like 1982 or 83. And he said, "Oh, don't worry about it. That was only 6% of my asset." So this is a very wealthy guy. And he said, he's in his 90s, and he said he still wears a watch that is worth about $100 Canadian, right? So, and of course, I'm not saying there would be a frugal thing like the what do you call that, the miser, the mean miser. So, but you guys seen a lot of wealthy clients, right? So is the thread about their spending mentality, spending habits?
definitely when it comes to wealthier clients, they do tend to be quite frugal with their money. And you see this kind of across the board. Like you take a look at one of the richest men in the world, Warren Buffett, and he lives in a house that's worth $500,000, drives a $50,000 car, even though he's worth tens of billions of dollars. And that's I think that's a really important thing, that especially when you start making money, don't just keep spending it. I don't think a lot of younger physicians and even business owners realize the time value of money. And saving an extra $100,000 when you're in your 30s, it makes a huge difference to your overall future savings. That you just have to save a lot less money to have a lot more net worth when you start saving early. And I think we're all a little bit guilty of this, that you want to kind of keep up with the Joneses. And I think when you're working in an industry such as yourself, Wing, there is a little bit of that, where you do see some doctors that do have some very, very nice cars and some very, very nice houses. And you want to have those things. And when you start spending almost a little bit too much money on that, it's a real quick way, unfortunately, to put yourself in a position that you feel like maybe you could be a little bit trapped, right? Like you're making good money, but now you've got this $2 million house, you've got a $200,000 car, you've got all these other expenses that you really are gotten used to. And now you want to take a step back from work, but you're stuck working those 100-hour weeks because you got this lifestyle you gotta support. Does it make sense? I mean, if that's really what you want to do sometimes, but from what I've talked to most physicians, they like the idea of being able to earn enough money that they don't need to work as many hours and they have a passive income coming in through maybe their investments or other kind of assets they own. And I think the younger you start with that, the better it is. So
yeah, dovetailing off that again, I think what I tend to see the ultra wealthy do is, again, I'm sure they've gone through phases of liking fancy cars, big houses, and sparkly watches. But kind of in the long term, what they tend to be drawn to are things that make their life easier, and things that free up their times, that opportunity. Because again, when you're that wealthy, your committed time towards work is worth tens of thousands of dollars an hour, or sometimes hundreds of thousands of dollars an hour, depending on what bracket we're talking, right? And so again, that opportunity cost, again, offloading the things that put a mental load on you to allow someone else to do it, to free up your time to either go make money or to enjoy your money. That's where I find a lot of the investment goes. So again, building that team to make your life easy, so you don't have to think about it. That's where a lot of the intention goes. And I think where you kind of have people who perhaps newly wealthy, and again, they like to be the person showing off, hey, here's my fancy car, when they go to Starbucks. I find a lot of wealthy people, they take a lot of joy in being a connector, of knowing someone. Oh, you need something? Oh, I've got a person for that, right? I've got a great investment advisor for that, right? I've got a great lawyer. I've got a great accountant, right? I've got a great team. Oh, you're doing that specific thing. I've got a person. Talk to my person, right? That's usually what they kind of take pride in doing, is connecting people to opportunities and to other people, as opposed to, oh yes, my house has 7 bedrooms. Like, that's great. Like, how many people live in the house? Do you use them all? It sounds exhausting. What happens when you lose your wallet? How long does it take to find it, right, in the house? Again, so, and that is, again, that being, having a person, right, who connects you to things. That's what I find a lot of the ultra wealthy take joy in having access to, and being able to offer to other people. So
That's right. I think contrary to popular belief, wealthy people are not materialistic at all. They don't talk about materials. And some would say if money can solve the problem, it's not a problem, right? They deal with things that money can't solve, right? Like time issues, relationship issues, and all that. Okay, so that's all insightful. So we only have time for one more thread, and that's very important. Where do they put their money? And so if you look at people who are really wealthy, like family office, 20, 30, 40 million, 100 million, and they have their own CFO, CIO, right? Chief Investment Officer, right? What do they do, right? And you look at pension funds, right? Like if you're big enough family office, you hire the CIO, they have to create some sort of portfolio, right? And you look at Yale, look at Harvard, look at UBC Endowment Fund. They're funds that would just perpetually grow and grow and grow, right? And people don't live off the proceeds, to live off the proceeds of the investment. So that's what we call pension style portfolio. So what is it like? Maybe I'll pick your brain, Simon. What is pension style portfolio? What do they look like?
yeah, I think the big differentiator between just the typical ETF versus a pension style portfolio is that typically when an ETF it's 2 asset classes. It's usually equities and it's bonds. So those are the 2 only asset classes, and those asset classes, mostly it's driven by market sentiment, and it's driven by what the general expectation of the future is going to be when it comes to the economy. Pension style asset management is, you're looking to invest in a lot of other things, alternative assets, everything from real estate to infrastructure to even a little bit of crypto, to gold, minerals, everything outside of just a typical equity fund. And the reason why people prefer this, and let's say the ultra wealthy, it almost comes back to our first point, which is don't lose money, manage your risk, mitigate your risk. And if you don't have all your eggs in one basket, your portfolio is just a lot safer, because each one of these, let's say instead of just having 2 asset classes, you have 10 asset classes. And that means any one of these 10 asset classes, if there's a catastrophic loss in one, most likely another asset class will go up because each one of these asset classes tend to have different drivers of performance. I will give you an example. For example, what happens typically during a down market is that, let's say the equity markets drop by quite a bit. It doesn't mean every asset class will also go down with it. Sometimes, a lot of times when the markets are down, infrastructure will be up because those are essential goods and services. You know, even when the markets are doing well, people are still spending money on water. They spend money on electricity. They spend money on all their things that they need to basically survive. So those tend not to get hit as hard. But also, they also do not go up as high when the markets are flying high. But you want a portfolio that is going to be basically well stocked to prevent any kind of shocks to the system. And like I said, one of the biggest things is that wealthy people control their risk. And the more diversified your portfolio is, the less likely it's going to get hit by a huge shock where you suddenly lose 50%. And I don't think a lot of people realize that, let's say, for example, the markets do lose 50%. It doesn't take 50% for your portfolio to recover. If your portfolio goes from 100,000 to 50,000, you need to get 100% rate of return to recoup to where you were before. And it is actually much more difficult to recoup from those big losses. And at the end of the day, the other big reason why wealthy people tend to have a more pension style asset management where they're trying to control volatility and control losses is that it comes back to risk tolerance. Even though the wealthier you are, you have the ability to take more and more risk, your willingness to take risk decreases significantly. Because I just, even thinking back to, you know, when I was young, I had a $10,000 portfolio. When it went down by 50%, I was a little bit upset, but I didn't really lose sleep over it. Now, if my portfolio lost 50%, I would be a lot unhappier. Like, let's say, and if we're really, really wealthy like Wing, and his portfolio loses 50%, it's very upsetting to have, like, if you got a 7 or 8 figure portfolio and it's down anywhere from, you know, $1 million to $5 million, it's a lot harder to stomach that. And that's why a lot of wealthy people do not want to do that. And it ties back to even when we were talking about loss aversion, and Jason had mentioned it perfectly, that when you start losing money, you do make some really bad decisions to try to remake that up. And it's really hard to do that. It's really hard to avoid it. And the bigger your portfolio, the harder it is to not be affected by that. And again, if I had a $10 million portfolio and I was making, again, 5 to 6% a year, and that's $500,000 to $600,000 a year, and the worst it ever did was negative 10 to 15, and I'm only going to lose $1 million to $1.5 million, versus a portfolio that is doing 10% every year and could potentially lose 50%, I'm for sure going to take the least risky portfolio, because I know that's how wealth is built. It's built slowly and with intention. And Jason probably could mention this as well. How many clients, wealthy clients, have you come to, Jason, that you talk to that's made their money, like they're millions in a year? I don't think I've ever seen that happen. I think every wealthy client I've seen, they build it over either in their business or their physician practice over decades, and they manage that money well and safely.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I won't talk much on this one, because obviously this is your wheelhouse, but I think just kind of dealing with it, it's important to realize kind of when you've won the game. And if you have the income that kind of a lot of physicians have, and you're starting to build up portfolios or real estate investments to the 7-figure number, like, you've kind of won the game. It is just a matter of not losing it, something Simon has touched on, right? And I think sometimes people, you know, if you're still early in your career and you rub elbows with maybe some other physicians who have, of course, much larger portfolios, who they've been doing it forever, it's important to just realize, again, they've built that over the additional decades they've had. Yeah, they didn't get all that in 1 year, and they've just been sitting on it under the mattress, right? That's how it's built over time. And yeah, it's important to realize kind of when you've already won that game, and it's a matter of stewardship at that point, making sure that you, and again, that doesn't mean you have to, again, live frugally to build it as big as you possibly can. Again, if you want to spend it and enjoy it throughout your life, and you don't have dependents, and you can do, that's fine. Again, it's that intentionality of realizing, okay, this is what's coming in. This is what I need to have by retirement. This is what I can then spend throughout my career and enjoy, again, without starting to overstretch yourself.
So I'm going to share one point that in the upmarket, let's say upmarket in stocks, right? You throw it at any stocks, everybody's going to win. Everybody would be a wealth genius. In the upmarket real estate, everybody does anything in real estate and they're wealth genius. But when the down market comes, right, they say the tide rises up, everybody can swim. When the tide leaves, then you know who's not wearing any bathing suits, right? Then you find out who's got caught with the pants down, right? So to be able to manage the risk on the downside, and that's what keeps the wealthy, right? It's a different game, right? Up game versus down game, right? So those are really, really good threats. And guess what? These common threats are really uncommon, right? You like to think that, they're so simple. They're not so simple. People who actually practice this with discipline, right? That is ingrown into their DNA, right? Those are the people that then they really truly win the game, slow but steady, right? So, and these are topics that we are going to deep dive in Mexico, but the difference is not like a dry webinar here or a podcast. We'll be having a tequila, sunset tequila. We'll be right by the pool or by the beach with Simon and with Jason and with the rest of us. So we hope to see you there. And I want to thank Simon and Jason for this very special episode to share their collective experience with their very top tier clientele, right? That we just to peel down onions to something that we learn from. We want to start with the end in mind, right? So that's why we're learning it while we may not be there on our way there. So, I want to thank you again, Simon and Jason. And all right, we hope to see everybody there. And Jason, in a couple of weeks, is going to talk to us about, in a masterclass, about year-end tax planning, right? And year-end tax planning is super important because you have to end strong. And then the reason we do the masterclass a little bit earlier is so that you have time after you listen to Jason with some of the tips he's going to give you. You can have time to go over with your tax advisors and to implement them. Okay, so we'll see you at the masterclass.
Thank you so much for listening to the Physician Empowerment Podcast. If you're ready to take those next steps in transforming your practice, finances, or personal well-being, then come and join us at physempowerment.ca, PHYS empowerment.ca, to learn more about how we can help. If today's episode resonated with you, I'd really appreciate it if you would share our podcast with a colleague or friend, and head over to Apple Podcasts to give us a 5-star rating and review. If you've got feedback, questions, or suggestions for future episode topics, we'd love to hear from you. If you want to join us and be interviewed and share some of your story, we'd absolutely love that as well. Please send me an email at kmilo@physempowerment.ca. Thank you again for listening. Bye.